Dawn crept over the rolling hills of Kent, gilding the Whitcomb estate in a pale and merciless light. A chill hung in the garden air, the kind that bit softly at the skin but never quite hurt, much like the world that had shaped Lady Eleanor Whitcomb. She stood by the fountain, still and composed, though her fingers trembled faintly around a sealed letter. The wax bore the crest of Earl Nathaniel Ashford, the man she had once believed to be her future. She broke it open with the caution of someone who already knew the words inside would wound her. They did. The lines were short, courteous, and devastatingly final. My dearest Eleanor, I am to marry Miss Catherine Hale, daughter of Lord Hale. The match is of necessity. I shall always recall you with affection and esteem. The ink blurred beneath a tear she hadn't permitted to fall. It rolled down, uninvited, onto the signature that once made her heart quicken. For a moment, she stood unmoving, the letter wilting in her grasp. Birds called faintly from the hedgerows, indifferent witnesses to the quiet undoing of her youth. In the parlor beyond the open doors, her mother called her name. Eleanor folded the letter with deliberate care, smoothing its creases, and tucked it into the pocket of her gown. "All is well, Mamma," she answered softly, her voice steady as porcelain. It was not a lie exactly, merely a truth postponed. She turned toward the house, where portraits of long-dead Whitcombs watched her pass. Each generation had known the weight of expectation. Hers, it seemed, would be disappointment. By afternoon, London already whispered. Servants carried tales swifter than carriages. The Earl of Ashford has withdrawn his engagement, marrying instead Miss Hale, whose dowry is £30,000. In the drawing-rooms of Mayfair, Eleanor's name became a sigh of pity, a cautionary tale murmured between fans and teacups. The Viscount's daughter, too lovely, too poor, too trusting. When she ventured once more to Bond Street, her old acquaintances greeted her with polite distance, their curtsies shallower than before. Nathaniel had not meant cruelty. He was a man shaped by inheritance, by the quiet tyranny of estates that must not fall into ruin. Yet affection, once bright, dimmed before the shadow of obligation. He told himself he had done right. And Eleanor, though her heart broke, told herself the same, because to admit otherwise would mean her love had been a folly. The weeks that followed were slow and airless. Rain drummed against the windows as though to fill the silence left by vanished callers. Eleanor's mother spoke often of prospects and invitations that never came. By winter, even the house seemed to shrink with them, the corridors cold, the mirrors dim. It was there, in that hush of loss, that Eleanor began to change. Grief did not make her bitter. It made her thoughtful. She spent long hours reading beside the hearth, her hands steadying over the pages of poetry and philosophy. She practiced the piano until her music grew less a performance and more a prayer. Servants who had once pitied her now watched with quiet admiration as her sorrow turned to composure. When her reflection caught her eye in the window-pane, she no longer saw a discarded fiancé but a woman newly aware of her own gravity. The seasons turned with quiet mercy. In spring, she walked through the gardens again, where the roses had once marked her happiest days. The air was rich with the scent of earth and rain. She stopped beside the same fountain where she had read his letter, and the memory no longer stung. It lingered only as a lesson, one she could bear without trembling. Her heart had not hardened. It had simply learned discretion. By the second year, Eleanor had become her household's quiet strength. When her mother fell ill, she managed the estate with gentle efficiency, corresponding with tenants, overseeing accounts, and restoring dignity to their modest means. In letters to a distant cousin, she wrote not of heartbreak, but of books, of the changing light in the orchard, of music. "I am not unhappy," she once wrote, "only older than my years, and wiser than my memories." London had long forgotten her name, but the memory of her grace lingered like perfume in rooms she no longer entered. And then, one morning, as she sat by the window writing, a sealed envelope arrived bearing an unfamiliar crest. Her maid placed it before her with a curious expression. The paper was thick, the seal impressed with the sigil of the Duchess of Pembroke. Eleanor hesitated, knife poised, a flicker of unease beneath her calm. The Duchess was known for her magnificent spring ball, a gathering that marked the very height of the season. Why summon a woman who had long withdrawn from society's stage? She opened it carefully. Inside lay the invitation, elegantly penned in gold ink. Her Grace, the Duchess of Pembroke, requests the presence of Lady Eleanor Whitcomb at her annual spring ball, to be held at Pembroke House, Grosvenor Square. The handwriting was unmistakably personal, not the work of a secretary. Her maid's eyes widened. "My lady, it is said the Earl and his wife will attend." For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. Her gaze drifted to the garden beyond the window, where sunlight wove through the leaves. There was no fear in her face, only the stillness of resolve. "Then it is time I returned to the world," she said quietly. "Let them see that I am not its casualty." That night, she laid out her gown, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk with modest pearls at the bodice. The candlelight softened her features, tracing the quiet dignity that had replaced her former girlishness. She studied her reflection, not in vanity, but in recognition. The woman in the mirror met her gaze without flinching. Outside, the wind carried faint music from a neighboring estate, a dance tune she once adored. Eleanor smiled faintly, not from happiness, but from peace. She folded the invitation and placed it beside her candle. 2 years, she whispered to herself. 2 years is long enough for mourning. The next morning, the carriage stood ready in the courtyard, its wheels freshly polished. The horses snorted in the mist as the butler fastened the final clasp on her trunk. She stepped into the carriage with composure, her gloved hands resting on her lap. The road ahead stretched toward London, the same city that had once turned its back on her, now waiting for her return. As the wheels began to turn, Eleanor looked out across the rising fields and felt, for the first time in years, the stirrings of anticipation rather than pain. She was not returning to reclaim anything she had lost, but to meet what she had become. The letter that had once broken her heart lay safely folded in a drawer back home, a relic of another life. Ahead lay chandeliers, whispers, and the echo of destiny drawing near. When the carriage disappeared over the hill, the morning sun caught the edge of her window, glinting against the silver clasp of her traveling cloak. It was the last light of Kent and the first of London, the closing of one story and the quiet promise of another. London greeted her with the hum of wheels over cobblestones and the faint perfume of spring rain upon stone. As her carriage passed through Grosvenor Square, Eleanor felt the pulse of a city alive with ambition and gossip. 2 years had changed little in its glittering facades, yet she saw it differently now, less a world to belong to than one to observe. The lanterns along the street burned like gold coins suspended in air, beautiful and cold. Her name would once again be spoken among them, she thought, and she was no longer afraid of what they would say. When she stepped into Pembroke House, every sense was struck at once. The sweep of violins, the gleam of chandeliers scattering light across marble, the whisper of silk against polished floors. The ballroom was a cathedral of excess, its every corner filled with laughter designed to be overheard. Eleanor's gown, simple yet refined, seemed almost defiant amid the jeweled opulence. Her entrance drew glances not because of ornament, but because restraint had become her armor. The Duchess herself greeted her kindly, an elegant woman with the air of quiet command who had clearly arranged this invitation with purpose. "Lady Whitcomb," she said warmly, "London has missed your grace." Eleanor curtsied with a soft smile, knowing that grace was often what society offered in exchange for mercy. It was not long before she saw him. The Earl of Ashford stood near the refreshment table, glass in hand, his posture immaculate but his expression strained. He had not changed greatly. Still handsome, still the image of measured decorum, but something in his gaze seemed older, heavier. Beside him stood his wife, Catherine, radiant in sapphire silk, speaking too brightly to conceal her boredom. When Nathaniel's eyes met Eleanor's across the room, his composure faltered. For a moment he appeared almost human again, guilt written in the line of his jaw. Eleanor inclined her head in courteous acknowledgment, nothing more. The gesture, restrained and flawless, struck him harder than any accusation could have. The music shifted to a waltz, and partners gathered. Eleanor stood alone, content to watch, when a presence stirred beside her, a quiet, commanding voice that seemed to belong more to thought than sound. "You do not dance, Lady Whitcomb?" She turned and found herself looking into the calm, assessing eyes of Alexander Ravenshaw, the Duke of Pembroke. He was taller than most, with the bearing of one unaccustomed to explaining himself. His expression carried neither pity nor curiosity, but a measured respect that unsettled her. "I have danced enough to last a lifetime, your grace," she said softly. His lips curved slightly. "Then perhaps you have only danced with the wrong partners." Without waiting for gossip to approve, he offered his hand. Conversation dimmed as they crossed the floor. The music began, slow and deliberate, each step measured as if the world itself had paused to watch. Eleanor's heart did not quicken from vanity but from the strange recognition in his gaze. A man who saw not her scandal but her silence, and understood it. "London whispers about you," he murmured as they turned. "It says you were wronged by a man unworthy." She met his eyes steadily. "London whispers about everyone, your grace. The wise do not listen." His answering look was thoughtful. "Then I am not wise, for I find myself listening only to you." The dance ended too soon, and the Duke bowed with a sincerity that felt rare in such a room. Whispers followed as he withdrew. An unmarried Duke dancing twice with a woman long marked by social misfortune was no small provocation. The Duchess, watching from afar, concealed a smile behind her fan. Eleanor, unaware of being maneuvered by kinder hands, drifted toward the balcony for air. Rain shimmered over the garden, the air fresh and alive. Beneath the archway, she caught her breath, half expecting the old ache to rise again. Instead, a strange calm settled over her. Nathaniel found her there. His voice, once so certain, was almost hesitant. "Eleanor," he began, "I did not expect you tonight." She turned slowly, her face illuminated by the soft lantern glow. "Few do, my lord," she replied. The silence between them was heavy with memory. He searched her eyes for the softness he once knew, but found something steadier, unreachable. "You must think me monstrous," he said quietly. "I think you human," she answered. "And I have forgiven humanity." The words struck him with more grace than reproach. He wanted to say more, to unburden years of regret, but she turned away, and the conversation was over. When she re-entered the ballroom, the Duke was surrounded by eager debutantes, their laughter fluttering like ribbons around him. Yet his gaze lifted the moment she appeared, and he excused himself with a courtesy that left his admirers blinking. He crossed to her with a deliberate calm that drew every pair of eyes. "You left before I could return your handkerchief," he said. In his gloved hand was a square of white linen, embroidered with her family's crest. She took it with a polite nod, but he did not release it immediately. Instead, in a gesture both daring and tender, he folded the fabric and slipped it over his sleeve, securing it as if it were a knight's favor. A ripple of murmurs spread across the ballroom. It was a small thing, yet in that world of rigid decorum, it was nothing short of rebellion. To display another's token, unwed, before the entire ton, was to declare allegiance of the heart. Eleanor felt the weight of every gaze upon her, but the Duke's calm presence steadied her. "Your Grace," she whispered, "you will cause talk." His eyes softened. "Then let them speak truth for once." At the edge of the crowd, Nathaniel's wife whispered sharply into his ear. He said nothing, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. The Duchess watched with serene amusement, as if she had orchestrated some long-deserved reckoning. Eleanor inclined her head to the Duke, her voice measured. "You play a dangerous game, sir." He smiled faintly. "I find it far more perilous not to play at all." The night waned, the air thick with music and intrigue. When the final dance began, Eleanor declined every offer, choosing instead to stand beneath the grand portico as guests departed. The rain had begun again, soft, rhythmic, forgiving. She had almost withdrawn to her carriage when she heard the sound of approaching footsteps. The Duke emerged from the doorway, his expression unreadable beneath the faint drizzle. "You are leaving too soon," he said. "The night owes you at least one promise." She drew her shawl tighter, unsure whether to smile or retreat. "And what promise is that?" His voice lowered, intimate as confession. "That no one who sees you tonight will forget they have done so." For a heartbeat she could not look away. There was no vanity in his tone, only a quiet certainty that unsettled her calm. She inclined her head, voice barely above the rain. "You speak boldly, your Grace." His answer was almost a whisper. Only because I fear silence would be a greater betrayal. Their eyes met beneath the lamplight, the moment trembling between propriety and something far more dangerous. Then he stepped back, offering her his hand to the carriage. The warmth of his touch lingered long after she withdrew it. As the door closed, he bowed once, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Good night, Lady Whitcomb." The carriage rolled away, wheels hissing over wet stone, and Eleanor watched the city lights blur beyond the glass. The rain fell harder now, but inside her there was only clarity, a quiet awareness that something had begun which neither rumor nor reason could easily undo. Rain whispered against the tall windows of Blythewood Manor as Eleanor stood before the fire. Her gloved hands clasped around a letter she could not bring herself to open. The seal bore the crest of the Duke of Ashbourne, Henry. For 2 years, their courtship had been the stuff of London whispers, the scandal of a heart once broken by an earl now carefully mended by a duke. Yet tonight, she felt the quiet tremor of doubt beneath the surface of her calm. The season had begun, and with it came the return of ghosts she thought buried. Whispers drifted through the drawing-rooms. The Earl of Pembroke had returned from the continent, richer than ever, his debts erased by a fortune earned through his marriage to a merchant's daughter now deceased. He was free. And he was coming to London. Henry found her in the library, his tall frame filling the doorway, his expression both softened by love and shadowed by something unspoken. "You have heard, then," he said quietly. She nodded, folding the letter into her palm. "I would be lying if I said it did not unnerve me." His gaze flicked toward the window, where the rain had thickened into a storm. "He cannot touch what we have, Eleanor. Whatever he meant to you, it ended long ago." But even as Henry spoke, she felt the ache of memory, of Daniel's voice, of promises made under the old oak in Wiltshire before ambition devoured affection. She wondered if he regretted it now. And, more cruelly, she wondered if she truly forgave him. 2 nights later, the Duke's carriage rolled into London for the ball at Lady Penworth's, the first grand gathering of the season. The chandeliers dripped with crystal light, the orchestra hummed a waltz that swelled through the marble hall, and Eleanor entered on Henry's arm like a vision from another world. She was grace itself, in silver silk, with a single diamond at her throat, and yet, as eyes turned toward her, one pair caught her unguarded, Daniel's. Time had changed him. His hair was darker, his shoulders broader, his expression carved with quiet remorse. He did not smile. He only bowed, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt between them. The Duke's hold on her arm tightened imperceptibly. "Ignore him," Henry murmured, his voice even. But Daniel was not a man to be ignored. Later, when Henry was called aside by a minister, Daniel approached her near the conservatory, where moonlight spilled through the glass. "Eleanor," he said, barely above a whisper. Her name in his mouth still had the power to undo her. "You look as I remembered." She lifted her chin, steady but trembling. "You remember only what you chose to leave." He flinched, then stepped closer, his regret stark and unguarded. "I left because I was a fool, because I thought gold could fill the hollow I made by losing you. I was wrong." The confession, though genuine, came too late. Eleanor's heart no longer beat for the boy who had betrayed her. It belonged to the man who had stayed. But Daniel was relentless. He appeared at every gathering, always on the edges of her vision, a haunting presence in every mirrored ballroom. Rumors began to stir, that the Earl sought to reclaim what he'd lost, that the Duke's affections would be tested by a rival who once knew her laughter by heart. Henry bore it in silence, but the strain showed. "If he comes near you again," he said one evening as they rode home from a reception, "I will see to it he leaves England entirely." Eleanor's hand found his, her eyes shining with quiet pain. "Please, do not fight ghosts for me. I have chosen my life, and it is with you." Still, fate was not yet done testing her resolve. A week later, a letter arrived bearing Daniel's handwriting, its words trembling with sincerity. "Meet me once, only once, at the old bridge at dawn. There is something I must say before I leave England forever." Eleanor sat for hours staring at the parchment, her mind warring between duty and unfinished sorrow. In the end, she went, not for love, but for closure. The mist clung low to the moor as she arrived. Daniel stood by the railing, hat in hand, looking both older and somehow smaller against the pale morning light. "I needed you to know," he said as she approached, "that I never stopped loving you. That I live with that mistake every day." His voice broke, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred her veil, carrying the scent of rain and regret. "Then live with it," she whispered finally. "Because love that comes at the cost of integrity is no love worth mourning." She turned and walked away, her steps steady even as tears burned her eyes. When she returned to Blythewood, Henry was waiting on the steps, his cloak damp, his jaw tight. "You went to him," he said simply. She nodded. "To end it. Forever." He searched her face, and what he found there, honesty, sorrow, and the quiet strength of loyalty, softened his anger into something else entirely. "Then let it be ended," he said, pulling her into his arms. The storm that had followed them for years broke at last. That night, in the flicker of firelight, Eleanor finally understood what it meant to be chosen, not for beauty, not for title, but for the quiet, stubborn truth of one's soul. Henry's hand brushed hers, warm and sure, anchoring her to the present. "Whatever the world may take from us," he murmured, "I will not let it take you." And for the first time since her heart had first been broken, Eleanor felt whole. As autumn settled over London, gossip turned to other scandals, other names. The Earl of Pembroke departed for Vienna, and was never spoken of again in polite circles. But in the gardens of Blythewood, beneath the ancient oak where vows had once been shattered, new ones were made, quieter, steadier, born not of passion's fire but of love's endurance. And when Henry kissed her there, with a soft hum of evening around them, Eleanor knew she had lived to see the rarest thing of all, a man who loved her not for what she could bring, but for who she had never stopped being.